I gave her everything. My name, my house, my savings. And the worst part? I still check my phone every morning hoping she messaged, but she never does. I'm sitting here at this beachside restaurant in Davao, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, and I can still hear her laugh echoing in my head. Micah's laugh. God, it was like music. She'd throw her head back, cover her mouth with her small hand, and look at me like I was the funniest man alive. "Franklin, you're so silly," she'd say, her English mixed with that sweet Bisaya accent that made my heart skip. I was 58 years old, and this 24-year-old woman made me feel like I was 20 again. The waiter brings our dinner, and she reaches across the table to touch my weathered hand with her soft fingers. "Babe, thank you for bringing me here. This is so beautiful." Her eyes sparkle in the candlelight, and I think to myself, this is it. This is what I came to the Philippines for. Not the beaches or the cheap beer or the weather. For her. For this feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could have a second chance at happiness. I should have known it was too good to be true. But sitting there, watching her smile at me like I hung the moon, I was drowning in hope. "Micah, I want to build something with you. Maybe we could start that online business you've been talking about. I could help you get it off the ground." She nods eagerly, her face lighting up. "Really, babe? You would do that for me?" The way she looked at me in that moment, like I was her hero, her savior, I would have given her the world. We talk about our future like it's already written in stone. I tell her about the small house I want to buy us in a quiet subdivision. She tells me about her dreams of helping her family, maybe sending her younger brother to college. "I never thought I could have dreams like this," she whispers, squeezing my hand. And I believe her. God help me, I believe every word. The ocean breeze carries the scent of salt and grilled fish from the nearby vendors, and I think about how far I've traveled to get here. Not just the 8,000 miles from Indiana, but the emotional distance. From the bitter divorce that left me empty, from the lonely nights in my trailer wondering if this was all there was, from the bottle of whiskey that became my only companion for too many months. She doesn't know about any of that yet. All she knows is that I'm Franklin, I'm American, and I think she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. "You know what I love about you?" I tell her as we share a plate of grilled prawns. "You make me want to be better. Back home, I felt like I was just existing. Here with you, I feel alive." She smiles and takes a sip of her San Miguel Light. "You are a good man, Franklin. I can see it in your eyes. My heart is safe with you." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. Safe. When was the last time anyone felt safe with me? The restaurant starts to empty out, but we stay, talking about everything and nothing. She tells me about growing up in a small barangay outside the city, how her father worked construction and her mother sold vegetables at the market. I tell her about fixing trucks in the Indiana cold, about the satisfaction of getting an engine to purr again. We're from different worlds, but sitting here, none of that seems to matter. "Franklin," she says as we walk back to the jeepney stop, her arm linked through mine. "I need to tell you something." My heart stops. Here it comes. The reality check. The moment she tells me this was fun, but I'm too old, too foreign, too much of a dreamer. But instead, she stops walking and looks up at me. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hang in the humid night air like a promise. I pull her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with the faint smell of the city. "Micah, I'm already there. I've been falling since the day I met you." She was half my age, and somehow, she made me feel like the luckiest man in the world. But as we ride the jeepney back to her apartment, her phone buzzes constantly with messages. She checks it quickly, types something back, then slides it into her purse. "Just my cousin," she explains when she catches me looking. She worries about me. I nod and smile, pushing down the tiny voice in my head that wonders why her cousin needs to text her so urgently at 10 at night. That night, lying alone in my small apartment across town, I stare at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead and allow myself to hope. For the first time in years, I have something to wake up for. Someone who lights up when I walk into a room. Someone who makes me feel like the man I used to be before life wore me down to nothing. I should have listened to that voice. I should have asked more questions. But hope is a dangerous thing when you've been starving for it as long as I had. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. Linda and I had been married 26 years, and she ended it with a signature and a comment about how I'd become emotionally unavailable. Maybe she was right. Working 60-hour weeks fixing trucks, coming home covered in grease and exhaustion, falling asleep in my recliner with a beer in my hand. That wasn't much of a husband, was it? The house felt too big after she moved out. Every room echoed with arguments we'd had, conversations we'd stopped having, and the silence that eventually replaced everything else. I took early retirement from the shop. Why not? The arthritis in my hands was getting worse anyway, and there wasn't much left to keep me anchored to Terre Haute. That's when the drinking really started. Not the casual beer after work, but the serious kind. The kind where you wake up on the couch at 3 in the afternoon wondering where the day went. My buddy Mike from the shop would call sometimes, trying to get me to come out, play some pool, meet women. "Franklin, you're 57, not dead," he'd say. But I felt dead, completely dead inside. The Facebook group found me, not the other way around. Indiana, guys living in the Philippines. I don't even remember joining it. Probably did it during one of those late-night drunk scrolling sessions. But the posts kept showing up in my feed. Guys my age talking about starting over, about how life was cheaper there, how the people were friendlier. Back in Indiana, I was invisible. Over here, I matter again, one guy posted, along with a photo of him and a young Filipino woman at some beach resort. I started reading more. Success stories mostly. Divorced guys finding love again. Retirement money stretching 3 times as far. Weather that didn't try to kill you 6 months out of the year. It sounded too good to be true. But what did I have to lose? The trailer I was renting? The job I'd already quit? The ex-wife who wouldn't return my calls? The plane ticket cost me $800. I booked it on a Wednesday night after finishing half a bottle of Jack Daniels and reading another post about second chances in paradise. The guy who wrote it, Dave from Michigan, said he'd been divorced, broke, and ready to give up when he decided to try the Philippines. Now he was married to a teacher from Cebu and running a small motorcycle repair shop. Landing in Manila was like stepping into a wall of heat and humidity. The noise, the smells, the chaos of it all. I almost got back on the plane. But something in the back of my mind, maybe desperation or maybe hope, kept me moving forward. I took a connecting flight to Davao because Dave had mentioned it was less touristy, more real, he called it. My first week there, I barely left the hotel. The jet lag was brutal, but it wasn't just that. I felt lost. Out of place. Like everyone could see right through me to the broken man underneath. I ate at the same restaurant every night, a little place called Lola's Kitchen, because the waitress spoke good English and didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing how to order properly. That's where I first learned about jeepneys, about saying para when you wanted to get off, about how to navigate the sidewalks without getting run over by a motorcycle. Small things, but they made me feel like maybe I could figure this out. Maybe I could actually live here. The mall food court was an accident. I was looking for an ATM and got turned around in Abriza Mall. That's when I saw her. Micah. She was sitting alone at a table, eating some kind of noodle soup and scrolling through her phone. She had this serious expression, like she was concentrating really hard on something. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing a yellow sundress that made her look like sunshine. I must have been staring because she looked up and caught me watching her. Instead of being annoyed or creeped out, she smiled. Actually smiled at me. "Excuse me," she called out in clear English. "Are you American?" I nodded and walked over to her table like my feet had a mind of their own. "I love your accent," she said. "Like in the movies." "Thanks," I managed to say, feeling like a teenager asking a girl to prom. "I'm Franklin." She introduced herself as Micah and asked if I wanted to sit down. Just like that. No games, no pretense. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. She asked about America. I asked about the Philippines. She told me she was trying to start an online business selling clothes and accessories. I told her I used to fix trucks. When it was time to leave, she gave me her number without me even asking for it. "Maybe you can show me more about America," she said with that smile that would haunt my dreams. "And I can show you more about the Philippines." Walking back to my hotel that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like maybe there was a reason I'd come halfway around the world to a mall food court in Davao City. Back in Indiana, I was invisible. In Davao, she made me feel like a man again. 3 months. That's how long I waited before I asked her. 3 months of daily text messages, video calls when the internet cooperated, and dates that made me feel 20 years younger. We'd meet at coffee shops, walk around Roxas Avenue, take tricycle rides to parts of the city I'd never seen. She showed me her world, and I tried to show her mine through stories about snow and highways and truck stops that probably sounded as foreign to her as her world had initially felt to me. I knew I was going to propose the morning I woke up and realized I couldn't imagine going back to Indiana without her. The ring wasn't much, just a simple gold band with a small diamond I bought at a jewelry shop in downtown Davao. The clerk tried to sell me something fancier, more expensive, but Micah had always been simple in her tastes. "Franklin, I don't need expensive things," she told me once when I offered to buy her a nicer phone. "I just need someone who cares about me." We drove to Eden Nature Park in my rented motorcycle. She held on tight behind me, her arms wrapped around my waist, her cheek pressed against my back. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. The resort wasn't fancy, just a small place with basic rooms and a view of the mountains, but it was ours for the weekend. That evening, we sat on the small balcony of our room, sharing a bottle of Red Horse beer and watching the stars come out. The air was cool for once, a relief from the city heat. "Micah," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it, "I need to ask you something important." She turned to look at me, her eyes wide and curious. I got down on one knee right there on that concrete balcony, with the sound of insects chirping in the darkness and the faint smell of cooking fires drifting up from the village below. "Will you marry me?" I asked, holding out the ring with hands that shook like I was having a seizure. She didn't answer right away. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was going to say no, that I'd misread everything, that this old fool had finally pushed too hard. But then tears started rolling down her cheeks, and she nodded. "Yes, Franklin. Yes, I want to marry you." She said yes through tears, and I believed it was love. We called her parents that night. Her father was quiet on the phone, saying only okay in English before switching to rapid Bisaya with Micah. Her mother cried and wanted to know when they could meet me properly. "Soon, Mama," Micah promised. "Very soon." I felt like I was being accepted into something bigger than myself, a family that actually wanted me. The next morning I made the call to my bank back home. "I want to close my savings account," I told them, all of it. $38,000 that represented 26 years of marriage, early retirement, and careful living. "Sir, are you sure you want to transfer the entire amount overseas?" the representative asked. "I'm sure," I said, watching Micah sleep peacefully next to me. "I'm starting a new life." The money transfer took 3 days. When it came through, Micah hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Franklin, you don't have to do this. This is too much." But I wanted to do it. I wanted to show her that I was serious, that this wasn't some vacation romance or midlife crisis. This was real. We were real. We used some of the money to set up her online business properly. A laptop, better internet, inventory to get started. "Now you can be your own boss," I told her as we set up her small office space in the apartment we'd rented together. She kissed me and said, "We can be our own bosses." That "we" hit me right in the chest. I hadn't been part of a "we" in so long I'd forgotten what it felt like. The civil ceremony was small, just us and 2 witnesses we pulled in from the street. The judge spoke mostly in English for my benefit, but I could see Micah translating some parts in her head. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," she turned to me with that radiant smile and whispered, "Hello, husband." I kissed her, like my life depended on it. Afterward, we went to Jollibee of all places. Not exactly the wedding dinner of dreams, but she said she wanted something normal and happy. We sat in that bright red booth, sharing chicken and rice, and I felt more married than I ever had in 26 years with Linda. "So what now, Mrs. Franklin?" I asked her. She laughed at the formal name. "Now we build our life together, one day at a time." I sent a message to Mike back home that night. "Got married today?" I typed. "Her name is Micah. I'm happy." He responded an hour later with a string of question marks and "Are you insane?" But I wasn't insane. For the first time in years, I was completely sane. I had found something worth fighting for. She told me, "I don't care about money, I just want you." And God help me, I believed her. The first crack in paradise was so small I almost missed it. Micah had started locking her phone. Not obviously. Not like she was hiding something. But I noticed she'd turn it face down when she set it on the table, or quickly close whatever she was looking at when I walked into the room. Just checking orders for the business, she'd say when I asked. You know how customers can be. And the business was growing. Or so she said. New orders coming in daily. More inventory needed. Expansion opportunities in other cities. Babe, I need to travel to Manila next week. She told me one morning over coffee. There's a supplier there who wants to meet in person. Big opportunity for us. I gave her money for the trip without hesitation. That's what husbands do, right? Support their wives' dreams? But when she came back 3 days later, something was different. She was tired, distracted. When I asked about the meeting, she was vague. It went okay, still discussing terms. No details, no excitement about this supposedly big opportunity, just okay. The ATM receipts started piling up. Withdrawals I didn't remember making. 5,000 pesos here, 8,000 there. When I asked Micah about them, she looked confused for a moment before understanding dawned. Oh, that was for inventory. I forgot to tell you. Sorry, babe. Always a reasonable explanation. Always delivered with that sweet smile that made me feel guilty for asking. Her cousin Rika became a frequent topic of conversation. Rika needed money for her child's school fees. Rika's husband lost his job. Rika. Family is important here, Franklin. Micah would explain whenever I questioned another transfer. We help each other. That's how we survive. And she was right. I was the foreigner here. Maybe I just didn't understand how things worked. But Rika never seemed to be around when I suggested meeting her. Always busy, always dealing with some crisis. Next time, Micah would promise. She's shy around foreigners anyway. After 6 months in the Philippines, I was still yet to meet this cousin who apparently needed so much help. The late-night phone calls started around the same time. Micah would take them on the balcony, speaking in rapid Bisaya that I couldn't follow. When I asked who called, it was always just family or business stuff. But family doesn't usually call at midnight, and business calls don't require that much animated conversation. I started paying attention to the bank statements. Not because I didn't trust her, I told myself, but because I wanted to understand our finances better. What I found made my stomach twist. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Cash withdrawals in amounts that didn't match what Micah had told me she needed. Either she was terrible at math, or she was terrible at telling the truth. Micah, honey, can we talk about money? I asked her one evening after discovering another unexplained transfer. She looked up from her laptop with that innocent expression that had charmed me from the beginning. What about money, babe? The way she said it, like it was the most natural question in the world, like there couldn't possibly be anything wrong. I showed her the bank statement, pointing to the transfer that didn't match anything we'd discussed. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions, too fast for me to read clearly. Then she smiled. Oh, that! I forgot to tell you. Rika needed emergency money for her son's medicine. He was very sick. I had to send it quickly. Another reasonable explanation. Another family emergency I'd never heard about until after the fact. How come I never hear about these emergencies until I see them on the bank statement? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and curious rather than accusatory. She looked hurt, genuinely hurt. Franklin, do you think I'm lying to you? Tears welled up in her eyes. I try to handle family problems myself. I don't want to burden you with every little crisis. And just like that, I was the bad guy. The suspicious foreign husband who didn't understand Filipino family values. No, baby, I'm sorry, I said, pulling her into a hug. I just want to understand. I want to help make good decisions together. She nodded against my chest. I know. I'll try to communicate better. We're a team, right? Right, we were a team. But teams don't usually have secrets. And as I held her that night, feeling her breath against my neck, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a game where only one of us knew the rules. When she thought I was asleep, I felt her carefully reach for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up her face in the darkness as she typed a quick message to someone. I wasn't stupid. I just didn't want the truth. Not yet. I woke up to silence. Not the usual morning sounds of Micah moving around the apartment, making coffee, getting ready for another day of business meetings. Just silence. The bed beside me was cold, like she'd been gone for hours. Micah? I called out, my voice echoing in the empty apartment. No answer. I checked the bathroom, the small kitchen, the living room where she kept her laptop and business supplies. Nothing. Her laptop was gone. Her phone charger, the one that was always plugged in by the bed, gone. The small suitcase she used for overnight trips, gone. But it wasn't until I opened the closet that the reality hit me. Empty hangers. Gaps where her dresses used to hang. Her shoes, her jewelry box, her collection of perfumes that made the bathroom smell like flowers, all gone. She hadn't just stepped out for errands. She had packed. She had left. I stood there in my underwear, staring at the empty spaces where her life used to be, trying to process what I was seeing. People don't just disappear. Not without a reason. Not without a word. We'd had dinner together the night before. She'd seemed normal, maybe a little quiet, but normal. We'd watched a movie, gone to bed, made love like we always did. How do you go from that to empty hangers in 12 hours? My phone showed no messages. I called her number. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, bright and cheerful, asking me to leave a message and she'd get back to me soon. I hung up without saying anything. What do you say to someone who vanished from your life without explanation? I called again an hour later. Straight to voicemail this time. Then again, same thing. By noon, I was calling every 15 minutes like some kind of madman, hoping that this time, this call, she'd pick up and explain that this was all some misunderstanding. The apartment felt like a crime scene. I walked through it looking for clues, for something that might explain why my wife had vanished in the middle of the night. That's when I noticed the bank envelope on the kitchen counter. The one that had contained our emergency cash. Empty. 3,000 pesos that was supposed to be for just-in-case situations. Apparently this qualified. I took a tricycle to Rika's apartment, the address Micah had given me months ago when she first mentioned her cousin. The building was older, paint peeling from the concrete walls, laundry hanging from every available balcony. I climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door that was supposed to be Rika's. An elderly woman answered, looked at me with confusion when I asked about Rika. No Rika here, she said in broken English. Maybe wrong apartment? I showed her a photo of Micah on my phone. The woman studied it carefully, then shook her head. Don't know this girl, sorry. I checked the apartment number again. This was definitely the address Micah had given me. Either she'd been wrong, or she'd been lying. I spent the next 2 days riding jeepneys around Davao like a lost tourist, visiting every place Micah had ever mentioned. The mall where we first met, the restaurant where I proposed, the internet cafe where she said she sometimes worked when our home Wi-Fi was slow. Nobody had seen her. Some people recognized her from my phone photos, but nobody had seen her recently. The worst part was the hope. Every time my phone buzzed, every time I saw a woman with long black hair from behind, every time a tricycle pulled up near our apartment building, my heart would race thinking it was her coming home. But it never was. Just delivery drivers and other residents and the constant, crushing reminder that she was gone. On the 3rd day, my phone finally buzzed with a message from her number. I need space. Please don't contact me for now. That was it. 11 words to explain the disappearance of an entire person from my life. No explanation, no apology, no indication of when this space period might end, just a polite request to leave her alone. I read those 11 words probably 100 times, analyzing each one like it might contain some hidden message, some clue about what I'd done wrong or how I could fix this. I need space. What kind of space? Physical space? Emotional space? Space from marriage? Space from me? Please don't contact me for now. For now. That implied this was temporary, right? That eventually, contact would be welcome again. But the more I analyzed those words, the more they felt like a goodbye disguised as a pause. You don't need space from someone you love. You might need time to think or room to work through problems, but you don't pack up your entire life and disappear if you're planning to come back. The apartment felt like a museum of our relationship. Her coffee cup still in the sink from 3 mornings ago. A hair tie on the bathroom counter. The imprint of her head still visible on her pillow. I found myself talking to these remnants like she might somehow hear me. Come home, Micah. Whatever I did, we can fix it. Just come home. But she didn't come home. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was starting to whisper what I wasn't ready to hear. That maybe she never intended to. That maybe this had always been the plan. That maybe I was the only one who thought we were building a life together. I stared at that one message until my battery died. The bank statement arrived on a Thursday. I'd been putting off checking our accounts for a week, partly from dread and partly from hope that maybe this was all temporary, that she'd come back and we'd laugh about the time I thought she'd cleaned out our savings. But numbers don't lie, even when you're desperate for them to. $38,000. Gone. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious. But slowly, systematically, over the course of our 14 months together, wire transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. Cash withdrawals that added up to more than most people in Davao made in 5 years. ATM transactions that happened while I was sleeping or while she was supposedly in Manila on business trips. I spread the bank statements across our kitchen table like evidence in a murder trial, because that's what this felt like. The murder of everything I thought I knew about my life. Each transaction told a story I'd been too blind or too hopeful to see while it was happening. The business inventory purchases that never resulted in any visible merchandise. The family emergencies that required immediate wire transfers to accounts that belonged to people I'd never met. The medical bills for relatives who apparently existed only when money needed to be sent. I'd funded an entire fictional universe of crises and opportunities, and I'd done it willingly. My phone rang. Unknown local number. For a wild moment I thought it might be her calling from a different phone, ready to explain everything. "Hello?" I answered, probably sounding more desperate than I intended. It was a man's voice, speaking English with a thick Filipino accent. "Sir Franklin? This is about apartment. You owe 2 months' rent." "Apartment? What apartment?" "The one we lived in was paid through the end of the year." I'd made sure of that. "I think there's been a mistake," I told him. "Which apartment are you talking about?" He gave me an address I'd never heard of, in a part of Davao I'd never visited. According to him, Micah had signed a lease for a studio apartment 3 months ago, in her name only. She'd paid the first month's rent and deposit, then nothing. "She said you would pay," the landlord explained. "She said her husband would take care of everything." Her husband. That was me, apparently. The guy who paid for apartments he didn't know existed. "Sir, if you don't pay soon, we will take legal action." I hung up without promising anything. What else was out there that I didn't know about? What other obligations had she made in my name? The online business was the biggest fiction of all. I finally got around to checking the website she'd shown me, the social media accounts where she supposedly sold clothes and accessories to customers all over the Philippines. The website hadn't been updated in 4 months. The last social media post was a generic "thank you for your orders" message that could have been copied from any other seller's page. If there were customers, they were ghosts. If there was inventory, it existed only in the stories she told me. I found the receipts in a shoebox under our bed, receipts I'd never seen before, for purchases that came out of our joint account, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, shopping trips to malls in Manila during her supposed business meetings, payments to a travel agency for flights to Cebu that she'd never mentioned taking. She'd been living a completely separate life with my money, and I'd been too trusting or too stupid to notice. The worst discovery came when I finally worked up the courage to check the apartment lease. Our apartment, the one I thought we were renting together as a married couple. The lease was in her cousin Rika's name, the cousin I'd never met who supposedly lived across town and needed constant financial help. The cousin who, according to our landlord, was actually Micah's older sister and the primary contact for the apartment. I wasn't a tenant. I wasn't a co-signer. I was just the guy who paid the bills for an apartment I had no legal right to live in. If Rika decided she wanted me out, I'd have no recourse. No rights. No claim to the place I'd been calling home for over a year. The numbers kept adding up. Rent for an apartment I didn't know about. Credit card bills for cards I'd never seen. Loan payments to friends who loaned her money for emergencies before she could ask me. She'd built an entire financial ecosystem around our relationship, and I was the only one who didn't know it existed. $38,000 across 14 months. That worked out to about $2,700 per month, more than most Filipino families made in half a year. And what did I have to show for it? An empty apartment I couldn't legally claim, a business that never existed, and a marriage certificate that was starting to feel like the most expensive piece of paper I'd ever signed. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing that everything might have been calculated. The way she met me in the mall food court, alone and approachable. The way she asked about America on our first conversation, establishing that I was foreign and probably financially comfortable. The way she moved in with me so quickly, gaining access to my accounts and my trust simultaneously. I kept thinking about things she'd said that I'd dismissed as cultural differences or innocent remarks. Americans are so generous, she'd told me once after I'd paid for dinner with her friends. In the Philippines, we have to be careful with money, but Americans don't worry about small things. I'd taken it as a compliment. Now it felt like an assessment. I gave her my name, my time, my trust. And now I wasn't sure I even had myself left. I typed and deleted the message a dozen times before finally hitting send. Not angry words, not accusations, not demands for my money back. Just one simple question that had been eating away at me for 2 weeks. Did you ever love me? Even a little bit? The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, showing she was typing a response. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched those dots appear and disappear, appear and disappear. She was there. On the other end of cyberspace, reading my words, thinking about how to respond. For a moment, it felt like she was in the room with me. Then the dots stopped. No message came through. I waited 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour. Nothing. Maybe she'd changed her mind about responding. Maybe she was trying to figure out how to lie to me one more time. Maybe she was showing the message to someone else, asking for advice on how to handle her pathetic American ex-husband. I put my phone down and tried to watch television, but every few minutes I'd check to see if she'd responded. The uncertainty was worse than silence would have been. At least silence has finality to it. Those typing dots had given me hope, the cruelest gift she could have offered. The response came 6 hours later, just as I was getting ready for bed. You were good to me. I'm sorry it had to end this way. 15 words to summarize 14 months of marriage. 15 words that managed to avoid answering my question entirely. You were good to me. Past tense. Like something that happened a long time ago instead of 3 weeks ago. Not you are a good man, or you deserved better. Just, you were good to me. Like she was reviewing the service at a restaurant. Good but forgettable. I'm sorry it had to end this way. Had to end. Like it was inevitable. Like she'd had no choice in the matter. Like forces beyond her control had torn us apart instead of her making a conscious decision to pack her bags and disappear in the middle of the night. It had to end this way because she made it end this way. I read those 15 words until they lost all meaning, until they became just random syllables on a screen. I looked for hidden messages, for clues about her real feelings, for some indication that this was difficult for her too. But there was nothing there, just a polite, distant response that could have been sent to anyone about anything. I typed back, "That doesn't answer my question." Then I deleted it. I typed, "What does that even mean?" Then I deleted that too. I typed, "Please just tell me if any of it was real." Delete. I need to understand what happened. Delete. I love you. Delete, delete, delete. Finally, I sent something I could live with. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. It was dignified, I told myself. It showed that I wished her well, despite everything. It left the door open for future communication without seeming desperate. It was exactly the kind of mature, thoughtful response that a 58-year-old man should send to his 24-year-old ex-wife who had cleaned out his bank account and vanished. She never responded to that message. I watched the delivery notification change from delivered to read, which somehow made it worse. She'd seen my words, my attempt at grace under pressure, and decided they weren't worth acknowledging. Over the next few days, I found myself scrolling through our old conversations like a detective looking for clues I'd missed. The early messages were painful to read. "Good morning, my love." She'd text me every day for the first 6 months. "I can't wait to see you today. You make me so happy. I'm so lucky to have you in my life." Had she meant any of it, or was it all just part of an elaborate performance? I noticed patterns I'd been blind to before. How her messages became shorter and less frequent after we got married. How "I love you" gradually became "love you," and then just heart emojis and finally nothing at all. How she stopped asking about my day and started only messaging when she needed something. The decline was so gradual I hadn't noticed it happening, like watching someone age in slow motion. There were messages about money mixed in with declarations of love. Babe, can you send 5,000 for Rika's medicine? Followed immediately by I miss you so much. Emergency with Mama's hospital bill. Followed by you're the best husband ever. The manipulation was surgical in its precision, embedding financial requests between emotional affirmations so I'd associate giving her money with being loved. I found myself studying the timestamps, trying to figure out when she'd sent certain messages. Some of the late-night miss you texts had been sent while I was sleeping right next to her. Why text someone who's 3 feet away unless you're practicing for an audience, unless you're building a digital paper trail of fake affection? The last real conversation we'd had was 3 days before she disappeared. I'd asked her what she wanted for her upcoming birthday, and she'd said she didn't need anything material. Just you, babe. Just more time together. It felt genuine at the time, sweet and romantic. Now it felt like she'd been saying goodbye without me realizing it. I tried calling her number one more time, knowing it would go straight to voicemail but needing to hear her voice again. Instead, I got a recorded message in Tagalog followed by English. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She'd changed her number. Cut the last thread connecting us. Even if I wanted to grovel, to beg, to make a complete fool of myself, I couldn't reach her now. That's when I finally understood. This wasn't a separation, or a rough patch, or a misunderstanding. This was an ending. Clean, final, and one-sided. She'd planned her exit strategy while I was planning our future. While I was researching land prices for the house we'd never build, she was probably researching the best way to disappear from someone's life without a trace. The truth didn't come like a slap. It came like silence. I started taking long walks through Davao, not because I enjoyed walking but because sitting still made the thoughts too loud. The city looked different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The streets where we used to hold hands felt wider, emptier. The restaurants where we shared meals seemed smaller, seedier. Even the smell of street food that used to make my mouth water now just reminded me of conversations that might have been lies. People's Market was our Sunday tradition. We'd walk through the stalls together, her teaching me the names of fruits I'd never seen before, me marveling at how she could negotiate prices in 3 different languages. This is rambutan, she'd say, peeling the spiky red skin to reveal the white flesh inside. Try it. Sweet like lychee. I'd eat it from her fingers, tasting the fruit and her skin at the same time, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. Now I walked through those same stalls alone, and the vendors who used to greet us both with smiles looked at me with something that might have been pity. They'd seen this before, I realized. The foreign guy wandering around looking lost after his young girlfriend disappeared. I wasn't unique. I wasn't special. I was just another cautionary tale in a city full of them. The apartment felt like a museum exhibit. Naive American man, circa 2024. Her empty coffee cup still sat in the sink because washing it felt too much like giving up hope. Her pillow still smelled faintly of her shampoo, and I found myself sleeping on my side of the bed like she might come back in the middle of the night and need the space. I started conversations with myself, practicing what I'd say if she walked through the door. Sometimes I was angry. How could you do this to me? I trusted you with everything. Sometimes I was desperate. Please, just tell me what I did wrong. I can change. Sometimes I was mature and understanding. I hope you found what you were looking for. I wish you well. But she never walked through the door, so the conversation stayed one-sided. The expat Facebook groups I joined when I first arrived were full of similar stories. Guys posting about wives and girlfriends who'd vanished with their money, their hearts, their faith in human nature. The comments were always the same mixture of sympathy and harsh reality checks. Sorry bro, but you got played. Classic Filipina scam. Happens all the time. Should have seen the red flags. Easy to say after the fact. Impossible to see when you're drowning in hope. I met with Dave, the guy from Michigan whose success story had partly inspired my move to the Philippines. We sat in a coffee shop in Aldavinco, and he listened to my story without judgment. The thing is, he said finally, some of these relationships work out. Mine did. But you have to go in with your eyes open, and you went in with your heart open instead. So what do I do now? I asked him. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You have 2 choices. You can let this destroy you, or you can let it teach you. Both hurt like hell, but only one of them gives you a chance to be happy again someday. He was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are 2 different things entirely. I found myself walking past the mall where we first met, standing in the exact spot where I'd seen her eating noodle soup and smiling at a stranger. I tried to remember who I was before that moment. Lonely, yes. Broken from the divorce, definitely. But I had dignity then. I had savings. I had the ability to trust my own judgment. All of that felt like a previous lifetime now. The hardest part wasn't the money or even the betrayal. It was the questioning. Had she ever laughed at my jokes because they were funny, or because laughing made me generous? Had she ever been genuinely attracted to me, or was physical affection just part of the job? Had any moment of our relationship been authentic, or was it all an elaborate performance designed to separate me from my life savings? I would never know the answers to those questions, and that uncertainty was its own special kind of torture. At least if I knew for certain that it had all been fake, I could hate her cleanly. Or if I knew that some of it had been real, I could treasure those moments. But living in the space between knowing and not knowing felt like being trapped in emotional limbo. One evening, I walked to Roxas Avenue where the night market sets up after sunset. Street vendors selling everything from grilled squid to knockoff designer handbags. Families out for cheap entertainment, couples sharing halo, kids running between the stalls with sticky fingers and bright smiles. Life going on like my world hadn't imploded 3 weeks ago. I bought a beer from a vendor and sat on the seawall, watching ships move slowly across Davao Gulf. The water was dark except where it caught reflections from the city lights. Somewhere out there was the rest of the world, full of people who had never heard of Franklin from Indiana or Micah from Davao. People living their lives, making their mistakes, hopefully learning from them. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious but felt like a revelation. I was still alive. Broken, humiliated, financially devastated, but alive. My heart was still beating. My lungs were still working. The sun would come up tomorrow whether I was ready for it or not, and maybe eventually I could build something new from the wreckage of what I thought my life was going to be. I didn't come to Davao to fall in love. I came here to disappear. But she found me first and broke the last pieces I was trying to protect. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in my story, if you're the guy who thinks he's found something real with someone half his age on the other side of the world, I need you to hear something. I'm not telling you this story to convince you that all relationships like this are doomed. Some aren't. Some work out. But I am telling you to protect yourself in ways I didn't. It's been 2 months since Micah disappeared from my life, and I'm still in Davao. Not because I'm hoping she'll come back, though there's a part of me that still checks my phone every morning just in case. I'm here because this is where I learned the hardest lesson of my life. And leaving feels like running away from the education I paid $38,000 to receive. I've got a small apartment now, one I can actually afford on my Social Security. It's not much, just a studio with a decent view of the city and neighbors who nod politely but don't ask too many questions about why an American man of my age is living alone in their building. I sleep better now than I did in those first weeks after she left. The nightmares about empty bank accounts and fake smiles have mostly stopped. The money is gone, and I've made peace with that. What choice do I have? I can't undo the wire transfers or take back the cash I handed over willingly. I can't recover the rent I paid for apartments I didn't know existed or the business investments that were actually personal shopping sprees. The money is gone, but the man who lost it is still here, and he's learned some things about himself that might be worth more than what he paid to learn them. I was lonely. That's the truth I have to start with. Not just divorced guy lonely or retirement lonely, but bone-deep, soul-crushing lonely. The kind of lonely that makes you vulnerable to anyone who pays attention to you, who makes you feel like you matter. Micah didn't create that loneliness. She just found it and used it. That's on me, not her. I was also naive in a way that 58-year-old men shouldn't be. I wanted to believe that love could happen quickly, that age gaps didn't matter, that cultural differences were just obstacles that genuine affection could overcome. I wanted to believe that a beautiful young woman could fall in love with an overweight, aging mechanic from Indiana because of his personality and not his passport. Maybe some could. Micah wasn't one of them. But here's what I've learned that might matter. I survived this. The humiliation, the financial devastation, the complete reconstruction of everything I thought I knew about my own judgment and worth. I survived it, and surviving it taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Not strong enough to avoid getting played, but strong enough to rebuild afterward. I've started writing. Nothing fancy, just a blog about expat life in the Philippines from the perspective of someone who learned the hard way. It doesn't pay much, but it pays something, and more importantly, it gives me a purpose beyond sitting around feeling sorry for myself. Turns out people want to hear stories about resilience, about making mistakes and living through them. The loneliness is still there, but it's different now. It's not the desperate, grasping loneliness that made me easy prey. It's the clean loneliness of someone who's learning to be comfortable with his own company. I eat dinner alone without feeling pathetic. I go to movies by myself without pretending I'm meeting someone. I'm alone, but I'm not desperate to not be alone, and that makes all the difference. I think about Micah sometimes, usually late at night when the city gets quiet and the thoughts get loud. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, if she feels any guilt about what she did, if the money improved her life in whatever way she was hoping it would. Mostly, though, I hope she got what she needed. Not because I'm noble or forgiving, but because holding on to anger about it only hurts me. To anyone who might be where I was 14 months ago, planning to wire their life savings to someone they met on vacation, believing they've found true love in a place where true love costs exactly what they happen to have in the bank, I won't tell you not to do it. Love is love, and sometimes it finds you in unexpected places with unexpected people. But protect yourself. Keep some money in an account only you can access. Take time to meet their friends and family. Ask questions about things that don't add up. Trust, but verify. And if it all goes wrong, if you end up broken and broke in a foreign country wondering how you got so foolish so fast, remember this: you can survive it. The shame will fade. The money can be earned again, or you can learn to live without it. The loneliness that made you vulnerable can be transformed into the solitude that makes you strong. You can rebuild yourself from the pieces they leave behind. Love doesn't always save you. Sometimes it teaches you how to save yourself. I'm Franklin. I gave away everything I had to someone who didn't love me back. And I'm still here, still breathing, still learning how to be the man I want to be instead of the man I thought someone else wanted me to be. If you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in it, know that you're not alone. You're not the first person to make these mistakes, and you won't be the last. But you can be someone who learns from them. The sun still rises over Davao Gulf every morning. The jeepneys still run their routes through the city. Life still happens here, with or without the people we thought would be part of it forever. And somehow, impossibly, that's enough.